People called it the Dust Bowl, an environmental disaster that struck the Great Plains in the late 1930s, when the country was already reeling under the Depression. John Steinbeck's best-selling novel, The Grapes of Wrath, profiled some of the hardest hit. Tenant farmers forced off their land and into migrant labor, far from home. When the movie version was announced, people worried that Hollywood would ruin it. They didn't need to. It was directed by John Ford.
You don't understand, son. This is my land.
Used to be your land. It's the company's now.
Have it your own way, son. But just as sure as you touch my house with that cat, I'm gonna blow you plumb to kingdom come.
You ain't gonna blow nobody nowhere. First place, they'd hang you and you know it. For another, it wouldn't be 2 days before they'd send another guy up here to take my place. Now go on, get out of the way.
When you think classical filmmaking, the first thing that comes to mind is John Ford. There's no doubt about it.
One of the things that Ford wanted in the frame was a sense of reality. It feels like it's actually taking place in front of us.
It's interesting to start analyzing it too, saying, why is that interesting to me? Well, maybe it's the way the light is coming through the windows. Maybe it's a gesture the actor makes. But I find that it has to do with the humanity, it has to do with the people. You like to be with the people that he portrays in these films, the world that they're in, the world that Ford's creating.
When John Ford began The Grapes of Wrath in 1939, he may have been Hollywood's top director. He'd just finished 3 films back-to-back, but he didn't approach this as just another job.
The perfect person to make that film was Ford, because the nature of what was happening in America at that time, and the subject matter, the Joad family, the working class, the workers, the farmers. This is something that he could identify with. And it also, the power of the material just enabled him, I think, maybe freedom to explore that visually poetic nature that he had.
Sure don't look none too prosperous.
A master storyteller, Ford brought to life one family's journey from the Dust Bowl to an uncertain future in California. Along with the large public scenes, he captured the small private ones and wasn't above using sentimentality to make his point.
Ma, I'm ready.
There often wasn't a kind of emotional sophistication in Ford's movies. But then the breakthrough to real moments, and it's heartrending.
Is them penny candies, ma'am?
Which ones?
There, them stripy ones.
Oh, them? Well, no. Them's 2 for a penny.
Give us 2 then, ma'am. Go on, take 'em, take 'em. Thank you, ma'am.
Them ain't 2 for a cent, Candy.
What's it to you?
The Grapes of Wrath captured the experience of the Depression like no other film. Ford knew what he was doing. He'd grown up along with the film industry. In 1914, a 19-year-old named Jack Feeney from Portland, Maine, stepped off a train in Los Angeles and headed to a dusty suburb called Hollywood. The fledgling movie business had just set up shop there a few years before. Junk dealers were turning into producers, cowboys into stuntmen, and circus performers into matinee idols. But a much bigger transformation was also taking place: the creation of filmmaking.
We accept film today. Images tell stories. Well, back then, they had to make the image tell the story, which means they had to invent it. If the horses galloped out of screen left and you made a cut, how did they come in the next frame? Top of the frame, side, left, right? You know, which cut better? And what did cut mean?
Jack's older brother Francis knew what cut meant, along with other film terms. Already a successful director and actor, he'd taken the screen name Frank Ford. Frank took Jack in, but made him learn filmmaking from the ground up.
Why shouldn't he treat him harshly? Frank's been out here 10 years, he's made a name for himself, and here's a, fresh young snot that comes out here. I mean, what's he gonna do? Put him in charge? Frank treated Jack harshly, but he also treated him with kindness. And he gave him the opportunity to learn, which is the greatest gift of all.
In no time, Jack was doing everything Frank did, including taking his last name, Ford.
Jack Ford could be one pushy son of a bitch, too. So you had to kind of keep him at bay, and I think Frank, as the older brother, knew that.
The pushy younger brother soon left Frank in the dust. As Jack later recalled, a lucky break on a movie set made him a director at age 23.
We had a western street and a bunch of cowboys. I put a lot of kerosene and gasoline in the place and burnt the town down. Had the cowboys running up and down. They thought it was great. Mr. Lemley says, that Jack Ford, he yells real loud. He'd make a good director.
Ford would cultivate a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense director. But in 1917, he still had a lot to learn. Universal Studios head Carl Laemmle paired him with cowboy star Harry Carey, a smart, charismatic actor and writer. During the next 4 years, Ford and Carey would make some 25 films together.
Harry Carey really taught him his trade as a director. He gave him the opportunity to go out and work on low-budget, two-reel westerns, shows that people really didn't pay much attention to, but they really taught him a lot of stylistic tricks. He learned how to shoot fast, he learned how to shoot off the cuff. A quick change of weather meant a quick change of script.
Ford didn't just take chances with the weather. One of his first films with Carey, Straight Shooting, was supposed to be a short film called a two-reeler. But far from producers and accountants, in what were then the wilds of Southern California, the two young men turned it into a full-length film, making up the story as they went along.
They hijacked a couple extra cans of film and shot a feature-length film in the same amount of days that it would have taken to shoot a two-reeler and just turned it in. And, the first reaction was the lab bill. Somebody had a fit. The second thing, Carl Laemmle says, hey, we can release this as a feature. This is great. This was one of the things that made his career.
Straight Shooting taught John Ford the further away from Hollywood and meddling producers he filmed, the more freedom he had. A lesson he never forgot. And Harry Carey introduced a kind of hero who would reappear in later John Ford films, the good bad man.
In Ford films, there is a notion of sin, and there's also a notion of redemption. Honor and duty, these are very important characteristics. His films are full of good bad men who redeem themselves by some action.
That trust in audiences, being able to understand that we are all, in some ways, brigands and pirates and thieves who feel some sense of guilt about trying to take things that don't belong to us, is integral to the heroic moments in Ford's movies.
Beginning with straight shooting, moviegoers responded to those moments.
Movies were for the masses. It's not upper-class art, right, at that time. They thought, anyway. So, I mean, here's a man who's a working-class guy, and I think he appeals to the masses, really. I think because they understand that he knows who they are.
He knew because he was one of them. John Ford was the 10th of 11 children in an Irish immigrant family.
They lived in Portland, Maine, which had a strong Irish community. They were not liked, they were not welcomed by the native Yankees. He was discriminated against as a child. He was very aware of his Irish roots.
Throughout his career, Ford would revisit themes reflecting the Irish immigrant experience: family, community, duty, intolerance, and loss. But by the mid-1920s, Hollywood's wild and woolly startup days were over. Studio heads, producers called the shots, and directors were just hired hands. Ford paid his dues, churning out dozens of dramas, melodramas, and war films. He earned a reputation for delivering commercially successful movies on time and on budget.
There wasn't a lot of stuff left over. If he was making a size 40 suit, he made a size 40 suit. There were no scraps left over. Next suit, give me some more burlap so I can make another one of these things. All right, now I'll make a saddle. And then he moved on to the next thing.
The pressure cooker atmosphere sharpened not only Ford's craftsmanship, but also his larger vision as a filmmaker. With each new film, his stature grew, and Ford was increasingly able to convince studio heads to back films he wanted to make.
A common pattern you see in John Ford is, well, I'll make you a commercial picture. If it makes money, you let me make the one I want.
In 1939, the film he wanted to make was his first Western in years, Stagecoach. Westerns were considered old hat, but Ford almost single-handedly reinvented the genre.
It's not a straight story. It's a story about 5 or 6 people in a stagecoach. And it becomes something almost like a metaphor for us on this planet. All our stories, you know, and the danger around us and how we deal with it, who we are, how we're judged by other people. All of this, that's what made it so interesting as a film, as a Western. This is the first major Western that was taken seriously. Everything before Stagecoach is interesting and good to a certain extent. A lot of it's very good. But from Stagecoach on, it really becomes an artist.
A surprise box office hit, Stagecoach made a star of the young John Wayne and signaled Ford's arrival as a master filmmaker. His technical expertise and creative vision had come together. Starting with Stagecoach, Ford would direct 7 films within a 3-year period, 4 of them widely considered masterpieces.
We always wondered how the old Hollywood directors could do 2 or 3 pictures a year, in some cases 5. At that time, they didn't edit their own films. There's the famous line, I forget which film it's from, but There's a character standing and dust is kicked up, and it creates a beautiful effect. And Ford looks at it and he said, "I'd like to take a close-up of him standing there, but some son of a bitch will want to use it." Some son of a bitch will want to use it. That's some guy in the editing room that doesn't see. So you control the picture by what you shoot.
It was partly about control and partly Ford's supreme self-confidence as a filmmaker. But his reputation for speed and economy, as much as his talent, made Ford a last-minute replacement to direct the big-budget film, How Green Was My Valley. The film's story seemed made for Ford. He would fill the tragic tale of a family and community's disintegration with a loving glow.
How Green Was My Valley. That's a perfect example of the family and how it works. The father being the head of the family, the mother also being the head of the family in another way.
In a wedding scene, the bride's true love is not the groom, but the man in the background. We feel his regret without seeing his face.
It isn't necessary very often to move the camera, to cut to close-ups. What's really holding the frame really is the relationship with the people. There's something truthful, honest about it, and warm.
There's nothing arch about it, and there's nothing commenting on the scene as you're watching it, and there's nothing to make you think about what's going on 3 scenes ahead of it. It's that thing that I think is probably the greatness of Ford, is that everything is happening in that moment, and you've got to live in that moment with the actors.
People say that his sets were like churches. They were very quiet because of his style of directing.
He was famous for getting to the set before anybody else got there. So you just look around. Because once people get there, you have the lights, you got the camera, you got people moving around, you can't see the scene. You got to get there early. And so when he got there early, he would just dream in his mind, that person's going to be here, maybe I'll have this guy come in. If I don't like it, I'll move him over here.
Ford arrived the first day of production thoroughly prepared. He rehearsed extensively, then often shot scenes in a single take. And he kept an iron grip on the set. His word was law.
It seems to me the way he behaved was the tough professional. I do my job, I'm a total pro, that's all I do.
He wasn't one of those directors who loved actors and sat and talked with them and wanted to hold their hands. This is a film we're shooting, know your lines, do your scene, next. And I think probably actors, for all his brusqueness and lack of tolerance, admired his sureness.
Cast and crew members stayed with Ford for decades, calling themselves the John Ford Stock Company.
He was the center of attention, and he designed it this way so that he would have this community around him of all these people. And that's what he lived for. And I don't think he was really happy doing anything else in life except making the movie, being on location, being surrounded by these people.
The man who celebrated community and above all family in his films and on the set had a family of his own, his wife Mary and their 2 children.
John Ford was not a great family man. First of all, he was gone too much. Like a lot of workaholics, the family suffers. And yet he was very traditional about the family, which is kind of ironic, isn't it?
Ford did spend time with his family between pictures, at home or on his yacht. But the first thing he did when he finished a film was hit the bottle.
He drank to slow down. He drank to get lost. That was his way of relaxing, of tuning everything out. I think he just had to shut his mind off. He would go on toots. Usually they'd start off pretty harmless. I remember him as a little kid. He was always kind of funny, as long as he stuck to the beer, but as soon as he moved off the beer, get out of the way.
Several of Ford's binges landed him in the hospital, but he had a rule: no booze while filming, and that applied to everyone. On the set and off, John Ford was intimidating and demanding. Yet he demanded as much or more of himself.
He always presented himself as a hard-nosed action director, when in fact he was a deeply sensitive, very aware man that was deeply affected by everything that went around him.
I think he knew damn well he was a poet. And the word poet or artist was anathema. But whether he likes or not, that's what he was.
It was late 1941. Ford's next film subject would test his abilities as nothing had before: World War II. A reserve naval officer before the war, during the war, Ford set up and supervised the Field Photographic Unit, filled with many of Hollywood's best cameramen. It was almost like having his own studio, filming the world's most important story. From North Africa to Burma to the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, Ford was there. In 1942, he personally filmed the battle that turned the tide in the Pacific.
You have this huge moment in history, the Battle of Midway, in which the whole world changes, America changes. And there is John Ford, our poet laureate, if you like, there filming it right on the spot.
Ford smuggled the footage past Navy censors and made the film he wanted: a moving portrait of men in battle, a tribute for their mothers to see.
It's one of the few films made during the war in which you see people wounded. It's almost like a prayer. It's so sober. When the film opened at Radio City Music Hall, the people were just crying. I mean, the whole auditorium was just running in water. People were so overwhelmed by this movie.
John Ford had stood up to admirals and hobnobbed with presidents. When he returned to Hollywood in 1945, he wasn't about to take orders from studio bosses again. But to produce his own films, he needed money, which meant making guaranteed box office hits. And that meant Westerns. In 1946, Ford, his cast and crew, headed to Monument Valley to film My Darling Clementine. It wasn't the first time he'd filmed there. Before the war, Stagecoach had introduced Ford to the region that became the signature background for his greatest Westerns.
Monument Valley was a perfect location for John Ford. He's a half-day's drive from the nearest telephone. Gotta love that. He'd like to go off in isolation with his stock company, with his players, and everybody handy, everybody on call, everybody nearby in case he had an idea or he changed his mind. He liked to work that way. And being in a place like Monument Valley allowed it. Now, obviously, there's the visual aspects of it.
There's something about the way he frames the people in Monument Valley that is very poignant. The figures of us poor human beings in the midst of this majesty. This world that we're a part of, but we're a very, very small part of. It's a strange concept of bringing, quote, civilization, unquote, to the West, to a land that maybe doesn't want it. Doesn't need it. We're there, maybe we don't belong there. It brings all this to mind.
My Darling Clementine is the story of Wyatt Earp, played by Henry Fonda, and the shootout at the OK Corral. When Ford first came to Hollywood as a young man, he'd met the elderly Wyatt Earp, who was hanging around the movie sets hoping to get a film made of his story.
Ford talked about the fact that it was important to him to stage the gunfight at the OK Corral exactly the way Wyatt Earp told him it happened.
Here they come.
My Darling Clementine tries to set all these things that are going on in a town with a real sense of community. That also came from Ford's background too, his working class background, his ties to his family, his ties to Ireland, to show that everything took place in a city or in a community, and every act had a repercussion on the people in that community.
Duty in Ford is often duty gone astray.
Finn, cover your brother.
Wyatt Earp is a Western hero. The Clantons have killed his brother. He has to revenge this killing. And he does, so fine, he's a hero. But there's the other side of it. In revenging the death of one brother, he gets another brother killed. And Doc Holliday gets killed. And all the Clantons get killed. So there's an ambivalence there between duty and the law and the purity of his intentions.
Clementine was the first of a series of post-war westerns that permanently linked Ford's name with the genre. Exploring how the West was won, they exposed, to varying degrees, the cost of winning, something Ford had experienced firsthand amid the carnage of World War II. Over the next several years, Ford would make dramas, love stories, and action-adventure films. But he kept returning to his tragic Western themes. And in 1956, he headed back to Monument Valley to shoot perhaps his most complex and modern film, The Searchers. John Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, Ford's ultimate good-bad man.
Welcome home, Ethan.
When Indians massacre his family, he seeks revenge.
What good did that do you?
Why, what you preach, none. But what that Comanche believes, ain't got no eyes, he can't enter the spirit land, has to wander forever between the winds. You get it, Reverend.
This is not the quiet American. This is the ugly American who's lost and adrift in his own land as the world is passing him by. He is the last holdout. He is the end of the 19th century, and he refuses to acknowledge the beginning of a new world.
There was something about Ethan Edwards that reflected Ford, I think, after World War II, having gone through World War II and what he did in World War II. I think he was open to questioning certain things about himself and America and the world. The darkness inside a human being And he confronted this in The Searchers.
By the time Ford finished The Searchers, he was internationally acclaimed and had won more Oscars than any other director. But years of binge drinking were taking their toll, and his eyesight, never good, was failing. He kept making films, but by the 1960s, public taste and the movies were changing. Ford's simple, broad strokes, his warmth and his affection for his characters fell out of favor with the movie-going audience he once drew in so easily. Accolades and reunions filled his last years. In 1973, John Ford died. A family member swore that Ford, ornery to the end, interrupted his own last rites and told the priest, "Cut."
A lot of people ask me, what is the secret of direction? Well, there's no secret about direction except good common sense and a belief in what you're doing. Most of the young directors are obsessed by the camera. Instead of looking at the people, they look at the camera. The secret is in people's faces, in their eye expressions, in their movements.
There's a simplification visually, and yet the scene, the shot is very rich. And at the heart of it all is the human heart. That's the key, the story of the people. I liked the people, but I could also tell that he loved them. Loved the people, actually, that he's making the film about.
I sure like that name, Clementine.